by a jus gentium, the common law of nations. Stoic philosophers, with their conceptions of human equality and a universal state, had their part in this great work and helped to make the law what it claimed to be, the embodiment of natural reason. It was enforced with discretion and with wise allowance for national customs and prejudice. Slowly but surely it made its way and recommended itself by its intrinsic superiority. 5. The empire was one in virtue of its central authority which controlled it, and the system of law which prevailed throughout its territory. There were other bonds which held it together. Modern nationalities are parted by language, but in the Roman world, two languages prevailed nearly everywhere. Modern nationalities are parted by languages, but in the Roman world, two languages prevailed nearly everywhere. The western provinces were Latinized. So completely, for example, had Spain and Gaul adopted the Latin tongue that the languages originally spoken in these countries have perished. Modern French, for instance, is a daughter of Latin and retains few and doubtful fragments of the old Celtic speech. Spain produced famous Latin authors, i.e. Columella, Seneca, Lucan, Martial, Quintilian, and one of the best of Roman emperors, Trajan. Greek was the language familiar to the whole East, with the partial exception of Syria and Egypt, and it was understood by educated persons all the world over, that known world. The Greek literature in the Latin, which had been formed after its model, had no equals. The Jews alone could be said to possess a literature apart. Further, great lines of road connected the most distant extremities, and public officers could travel by post at the rate of 100 miles in a day. By land and sea there was constant interchange of commodities, and in its better days the empire was saved from the famines which had often afflicted the infant republic. This led naturally to a fusion of all races in the great centre of trade, in cities such as Ephesus, Corinth, Antioch, and above all in Rome. Hence, in the cities where Christianity spread at first, national life was undetermined and could offer comparatively little opposition to the new and universal religion. 3. The influence of religion. It must not, however, be thought that Christianity merely filled a vacuum and met with little resistance. In a subsequent chapter we shall consider the legal opposition which crossed its path. Meanwhile, it is necessary to speak of two great forces which exercised wide and powerful influence. In part, they promoted the progress of Christianity, in part they retarded it very seriously. These forces were heathen religion and philosophy. They intermingled with each other, but we shall consider them so far as that is possible apart. 1. First then, with regard to heathen religion, it was exceedingly vigorous during the whole of our period and beyond it. A. No doubt the Roman literature at the close of the Republic and during the Augustan age affords some justification for the theory that religious belief was dying out among the educated classes. The Epicurean Lucretius attacked religion fiercely, and Horace, an Epicurean of less serious disposition, was certainly very far from any deep sense of religion. But literary men cannot safely be taken as representatives of the general sentiment, and besides there were other literary men of the same time. Cicero, for example, and Virgil, whose attitude to the traditional religion was much more respectful. Even those who had perhaps little faith of their own acknowledged the need of religion for the masses, or were disposed to maintain it on grounds of public policy. Women and the common people, says Strabo, cannot be led to piety by philosophic reasoning. They need superstition, and that's from Strabo 1-2, page 19. C. Maecenas is said to have advised Augustus to promote religion, because those who despised that would make light of all authority. B. But during the first 3 centuries of the empire there was a positive revival of the ancient religions. Able and enlightened princes such as Hadrian and the Antonines were conspicuous for their religious zeal. Marcus Aurelius, the philosophic emperor, was sedulous in his sacrifices. When he was with the army on the Danube, he flung live lions into the river at the instigation of a famous soothsayer, Alexander of Abonotikos. A wit of the day made the white cattle which were chosen for sacrifices after victory addressed the pious emperor in the words, "If thou dost win, we are lost." The satirical writer Lucian, who wrote in the 2nd century, mocked at religious observances, but he stood nearly alone, and he confesses that most of the Greeks, the rabble and all the barbarians, were on the other side. And it's from Lucian. And a book, Tacitus Histories, 250. C. Nor was it the noble only who clung to the old views. In all likelihood, the numbers of educated persons who discarded superstition utterly was very small. Here and there might one have met an Epicurean like Lucian, or a man of dry and rationalistic spirit like the elder Pliny, the natural historian. But there was no reason why an educated man of those times should distrust stories of the marvellous. The conception of natural law with its universal dominion was foreign to the ancient world. The Stoic, the Platonist, the Pythagorean philosophies accepted the popular myths, only purging them of their grosser and immoral elements. Certainly, tales of prodigies and omens found ready listeners among all classes. Tacitus is the last writer whom one would accuse of weakness or aptitude for superstition, yet he tells with perfect gravity and with a faith which is evidently sincere the story of an ominous bird which foreboded the death of the Emperor Otho. Indeed, he says frankly that he thinks it beneath the dignity of history to search for idle tales, but on the other hand he does not dare to disbelieve marvels when well attested. And that's from Tacitus Histories 250. The confident belief of Celsus is still more striking. This well-known opponent of Christianity was a contemporary of Marcus Aurelius. He was a man of wide culture, of philosophical tastes, experienced in the world, and though partly inclined to Platonism, a friend of the sceptical Lucian. Nevertheless, he confidently appeals in his attack on Christianity to the innumerable oracles and omens verified by the event, to miraculous cures, divine apparitions, supernatural vengeance meted out to the profane, or dealt out to the profane. All life, he cries, is full of these things. It's from Origen against Celsus 845. Very slight evidence, or rather no evidence at all if we judge by modern standards, sufficed as proof of the supernatural. A sudden storm relieved a Roman legion under the command of Marcus Aurelius when distressed with thirst. A heathen historian, Dio Cassius, who wrote in the same generation, attributed the storm to the power of an Egyptian sorcerer. Others thought it was given in answer to the prayers of the pious emperor, while Christians boldly assumed that deliverance was obtained by the supplication of Christian soldiers, and made the story more marvellous by the addition of extraordinary incidents which flagrantly contradict the sober facts of history. For the present, however, our concern is with heathenism. The belief in the heathen gods must have been strong when men were so ready to recognize their supernatural power. 2. The religion of the day was no longer the old religion of the Roman city. That religion still survived. Importance was still attached to the auguries and to the sacrifice which the magistrates offered in the name of the state. The Arval brothers still chanted their song in Latin of immemorial antiquity and made their procession through the fields, the same colleges of Priests performed the same sacred rites for more than 1,000 years, till the Edict of Theodosius at the end of the 4th century forbade their continuance. It's like a law or decree. Nay, the old religion put forth fresh shoots under the empire. A new goddess, a nonna, presided over the supply of corn which came from the provinces to Rome. The worship of the emperor's genius or guardian spirit was a genuine development of the old Roman worship. The worship gave little play to mythological fancy. It set up a series of dry abstractions, but it made much of reverence, of order in the family and state. Each detail of private and public life had its protecting deity. The genius of the Roman people had been adored as early as at least as the Second Punic War, 219 to 202 BC. It was therefore by a very natural logic that this cult was transferred to the genius of the emperor when the powers of the state were united in him. This worship became the central point of the state religion, and Roman though it was in origin, was promoted by the servile spirit of the East. As a rule, it was after their death that emperors and their relatives formally obtained divine honours. As many as 37 canonizations of this kind took place during the first 4 centuries of the empire. 5. There was, however, a vast amount of popular worship practiced in all Roman lands, and in Rome itself, which was utterly alien to the spirit of the old Roman religion. Polytheism is tolerant. A man's devotion to the gods of his country did not hinder him from recognizing the gods of other countries. When the barriers of national life were broken down, gods of many nationalities were mingled together. The Roman religion was above all things a state religion. It offered little satisfaction to individual needs. Now the mixed population of the empire was too cosmopolitan to be patriotic. Soldiers and merchants who passed from land to land adopted and spread the worship of foreign deities. It was Eastern rites which attracted the most numerous and zealous devotees. It was in vain that Tiberius tried to stem the enthusiasm for the Egyptian goddess Isis at Rome. Inscriptions still bear witness to her universal popularity in Spain and Gaul, in Germany and Greece and Asia Minor. About the year 200 AD, the Persian sun god Mithra, long known to the Romans, became the most popular deity of all and held his ground for 2 centuries. 4. For several reasons, these later cults have an intense interest for the student of early Christianity. They are often associated with gross sensuality and imposture, with a credulity which was, as we have seen, characteristic of the times. But we must not forget that they satisfied real wants, to some extent, rational wants of human nature. They were something more than additions to the crowd of deities, numerous enough already. Isis and Serapis were each identified in pantheistic fashion, with the one divine principle of which all popular deities were the symbols or the manifestation. Hence, the attraction which the worship of Isis exercised over an able statesman like Hadrian or a philosopher like Plutarch. The worship of Mithra was the nearest approach to monotheism which the Roman emperor made before it adopted Christianity. The old sun god had become the lord of life and death, the protector and the guide. The Roman state, as has been said, was bound up with an antique worship, but now the claims of individual life were asserting themselves. A desire awake for forgiveness of sins, for a life beyond the grave. Men craved for a religion which could create enthusiasm and satisfy love. The Roman Empire conferred many benefits, but how could a Greek or Syrian love a government in which he had neither part nor lot? The new worship promised to fulfill these desires. It had its sacrament of pardon. The worshipper was placed in a pit. An ox or ram was slain over his head. He was bathed in the blood which dropped upon him through performed perforated beams, and went away purified from sin. It satisfied the craving for sympathy. The worshippers met in small chapels, often underground. They formed a secret society in which each was bound to each by common faith and hope and discipline. They were subjected to asceticism, so severe that some died under it. The initiated were divided into different grades, and there was a hierarchy with a father or fathers at the head of it. Painted representations of their common meal were discovered in a crypt near the Porta S. Sebastiano at Rome, and were at first mistaken for Christian love feasts. The initiated were assured of a happy immortality. "Be of good courage," said the priest, as he anointed them with holy oil. "Be of good courage, ye that have been saved by God. After your toils, salvation will be yours." So, if that is what was said, and that sounds very similar to Scripture, be of good courage. Deuteronomy 31:6, "Fear not, be of good courage, for I am with you." Okay, it sounds similar. The social and voluntary character of this worship strikes us at once. In this respect, it offers the most obvious contrast to the old Roman religion, in which the consul sacrificed for the state, or the father for the family. Here, however, the worshippers of Mithra were not original. They were merely touched by the spirit of association which was then in the air. In every part of the empire, people formed clubs or societies. They had their trade unions, their dramatic clubs, their friendly societies, their literary associations. The impulse to association was so strong that the state felt obliged to regulate and sometimes to repress it. Now, it is to be observed that these clubs were in some cases directly religious. In nearly all cases were placed under the sanction of religion. They replaced the cold formalism of the official religion by the fervour which belonged then as now to small assemblies, where every man is bound to his brother and in that proportion separated from the outer world. Women and slaves were admitted to the worship of the chapel and met as equals at the fraternal meal. To some extent, at least, the members of these clubs seem to have been bound together by moral aspirations. An exact code of rules which has survived requires the officers to see whether the candidate for admission be chaste and pious and good. It is a pathetic feature in these associations that many of them were intended to secure decent burial for the members. The ashes of the brethren were set side by side, and there were pious unions in which the bond of brotherhood was believed to continue after death. Four, philosophy. While the poorer classes found their comfort in religious association, many of the richer and better educated sought it in philosophy. The functions of a philosopher under the empire were strangely unlike all that the name suggests, or chiefly suggested to us. The philosopher spoke to the public, who gathered in schools which were sometimes, though not always, open without fee. There he did the office of a modern preacher. According to Epictetus, a school of philosophy was the consulting room of a physician. Men came to the philosopher with maladies of the soul. It was an abuse to look for fine speeches and sounding phrases, for the real object was to depart cured, or on the way to cure. Philosophers also acted as wandering preachers who went from place to place, and called men from the storm of passion to purity and inward peace. They were the advisers of statesmen. The best of the emperors, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, the Antonines, were surrounded by philosophers. They were the confessors and directors of the great Canius Julius, went to execution accompanied by his philosopher, Rubelius Plautus and Thrasea, in their last moments, were sustained by the philosophers who were their spiritual guides. One, that's from Tacitus, Annals of History, or the Annals, 1459. Seneca, Tranquil, Anem, 14. Tacitus, Annals, 1634. The philosopher, moreover, figured as a kind of family chaplain and waited upon some lady of wealth who affected philosophy because it was in vogue. It's like, more or less like a fashion at that time, it was a trend. Such a position, of course, must often have exposed him to a degradation which he had brought upon himself. 2. How was it that philosophy came to play such strange parts? The answer is that philosophy had changed its character and aims. It was no longer a speculative system which strove to account for things by examining ultimate causes. Such was the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle. Such was not the philosophy of Zeno or Epicurus. Greek speculation died out after the death of Greek freedom. Zeno and Epicurus asked, how is a man to order his life? What must he do or not do that he may live well? The one put the end of life in virtue, the other in pleasure. But the spirit of each was practical, not speculative. Even the counsel given by the one resembled that given by the other. Seek freedom from passion, said Zeno. Seek freedom from mental disturbances, said Epicurus. 3. We may dismiss Epicureanism, which had no permanent influence in the empire, and look more closely at Stoicism. Zeno, who had just been mentioned, was the founder of the school. He taught at Athens about 300 BC in the Stoa Poikile, or frescoed arcade from which his disciples took their name. It continues. Summary of results. To sum up, the age which preceded and accompanied the growth of Christianity was an age in which men, ideas, things were mingled together. The partition walls between nation and nation were pulled down, and the belief in the unity of mankind was strong. The spirit of genuine speculation was dead. The literary splendour of Greece and Rome was fading away, and sense and taste alike were spoiled by garish rhetoric. But on the other hand, we find philosophers of many schools contributing to form an ideal of virtuous life. We find an increased spirit of humanity, which shows itself in the improved condition of slaves, in institutions for destitute children, in benevolent confraternities. We find an intermingling of all religions, and partly as a result of this a general tendency to monotheism, so that men retain the belief in many gods, but regard them more and more as manifestations of one divine spirit. Finally, we see in Neoplatonism an attempt to merge philosophy and religion, and particular religions, in one universal religion. Chapter 2. The Christian Mission. 1. Why the Christian mission travelled westward. In the year 51 AD, St. Paul had already preached Christ among the Gentiles, and his efforts had met with a success which compelled the older disciples to recognize the spread of the gospel among the heathen as an accomplished fact. From that time onwards, the work of conversion advanced, and always or almost always in one direction. The good news travelled from east to west. It travelled along the shores of the Mediterranean Sea, and Christianity established its first outposts in the towns which were within a moderate distance of the coast. The reasons for this are not far to seek. 1. The Romans had swept away the pirates, which had once infested the great inland sea, and had opened an easy and secure passage to the traveller. Again, Christian missionaries journeyed west because the Roman Empire lay west of Palestine, which had been the birthplace of the new religion. Within the empire, they had all the advantages which were enumerated in the preceding chapter on this side. Unity of government, unity of language, religious, philosophical and social ideas, which was permeating the whole Roman world and adapting the soil for the reception of the new seed. It is significant that the cities which represented best the mixed character of Roman civilization were just those which supplied the largest number of converts. Such was Antioch, such was Ephesus, such was Alexandria, such was the new city of Corinth, which Julius Caesar had founded and Augustus established. Such above all was Rome, the common centre in which all nationalities were at home. Had the missionaries taken the contrary direction and addressed themselves to the natives in the Far East, they would have met insuperable difficulties, and even if they had succeeded in one nation, they would have had to begin their work afresh in the next country to which they went. Yet the members of the Apostolic Church of the East, his disciples, etc., they went east and further east and preached the good news to everybody, and were successful in India, China and Japan.